So in our previous video, we took a look at the Rekon35 and discussed its full specifications. If you haven't seen that video, I'll leave a link above and below so you can take a look at it. If you've seen that video, welcome back to the channel and thank you. So today we are doing a full setup and first flight of the Rekon35, and we have all our equipment right down here. Starting from the left, we have our box style goggles, and we'll be using this to confirm that the VTX does work and we have the right channel. We have our Rekon35 right here. It's still in its bare form with nothing on here. And then we have our radar, which is the Jumper T-Lite with the Express LRS module on the back, since this is the protocol that we're using today. So the setup of this drone is fairly simple. The only thing that I did here is just put this antenna into the hole here of the TPU, and that's pretty much it. The drone comes pretty much fully assembled from the factory with the exception of the propellers. Now we can easily put the propellers on here right now, but we do have to go to the computer and go on Betaflight to configure this drone with our radio. Furthermore, since I do have the Express LRS version of this, we do have to go to the Express LRS configurator and configure the receiver before we actually pair it to the radio. So having said all that, you don't want to have the propellers on because you will be testing the drone on the desk here, and you don't want the propeller spinning just in case these switches are not configured correctly. So let's go to the table back there, jump on the Express LRS configurator and Betaflight and get this thing set up. Okay, so we're here at the computer. We have our drone here, we have our radio and our goggles as we mentioned earlier. I also have a fan here to keep this whole thing here cool, just for airflow. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do here, at least for me, since I do have the Express LRS version, is to flash this Express LRS receiver so that it can bind to my radio. And my preferred way is to use the Wi-Fi method. Now the first thing you're gonna do is go to your Express LRS configurator, which we have right here. I'm using an older version right here. And the first thing you're gonna do is choose your target. Obviously we have a Rekon FPV or HG LRC. It is the 2.4 gigahertz, and you have all these other models down here as well. So choose the one that's applicable to your drone. And then this is the RX, so that's good, chose that. And then I'm gonna flash it via the Wi-Fi. And then I did choose my telemetry. So I've made multiple videos on how to flash the receiver for Express LRS. So I'll leave that link down below if you want to take a look at that. And that's cool. So I want to flash this update, and it should take the update. Usually it says success. Oh, there it is. Oh. And I have telemetry. All we have to do now is go to Betaflight, and let's just see if it's even connected. Oh yeah. We have connection and the mapping is good. Everything looks good so far. So the ports tab looks good. We have 2 UARTs on 1 serial port here, 1 here for the receiver, which is good. So UART 2 will be used for our Express LRS receiver, and then UART 1 is used for our GPS, since this does have GPS built into it. Prop should be out, which it is. D-Shot 600. All right, so some of this stuff right here is really interesting because we do have GPS built into it, and it might give us some certain beeps if something isn't configured correctly. So we just want to take a look at that pretty good, clearly. All right, so we are using Li-ion batteries this time, so it's a little bit different than the LiPo batteries. Maximum 4.3 is correct. Now 3.2 is a little, actually, you know what? That's not bad. Here's the fail-safe though, which is really different than my normal settings here, so I want to make sure this looks good. I don't want it to drop. I do want it to go to GPS rescue. All right, GPS rescue is what I want. Angle, that looks decent. I'll just increase this a little bit. And then fail-safe only is when I want this thing to take into effect. So let's save and reboot. That should save it to there. And here's the big thing here. This is gonna take me the most time, is now that we have a lot of information on here, is where do we put this stuff? All right, this is done. Okay guys, so this is the first time I'll be powering this drone right here. And I have my batteries here. I'm using the batteries that I least expect to use in my flight. The most crucial thing here, guys, is make sure your polarity is correct. If you do screw this up, your drone will be fried. So just make sure the polarity is correct. So let's just do that correctly. All right, let's see what happens. All right, we have an image. A lot of the OSD stuff is not in the right place, so I'll have to change it. All right guys, this thing is all set up. Looks pretty good. I got a bind, or I'm bound to my radio. Everything looks good. I have my visuals with my goggles. Let's go back to the table, install the props on these, and yeah, go for a flight. So we're back at the table here. We have our drone here, and now we're gonna address the propellers and the batteries. Let's start off with the propellers. These are the Gemfan 3520s, T-mounted. Whoa, all these plastic pieces. A lot of people don't like these style of propellers, but it is what it is. All right, so we have our props in here. We just have to align the holes for the screws, and then we should be good to go. Let's take a look at it. So props are looking good. This thing looks like a real drone now. I mean, it is a real drone, but it looks official now, guys. Now I have 3 sets of battery here, and this is one of the most crucial points of this whole experience here, is choosing the right battery and knowing how to install the batteries correctly in this. As I said before in my first video, this doesn't have a diode, so there's no reverse polarity protection in this drone. And that's because Dave C and HGLC determined that there'll be a significant performance loss with the diodes in here. Now, these require 2 18650 batteries. I have some here by Panasonic. This one here is a 34 milliamp hour battery, so really high capacity. I have a Sony VTC6, and then I have an LG HE4, and this one here is a little bit lower. This one is 2500 milliamp hours. Now, they do recommend a 3000 milliamp hour battery, and that should give you around 50 minutes of flight time. Now, the other thing to consider here besides capacity is your CDR, or your constant discharge rate. And that's just as important, probably more important than your capacity. So just remember, with these batteries, it's one or the other. Usually manufacturers haven't figured out to get both or the best of both worlds. Usually you can get a lot of capacity or low amperage or low output amperage, or vice versa, high output amperage and lower capacity. And hence the reason why the LG here, this one here is a 2500 milliamp, but a 20 amp output. I'll put a chart up so that you have a good idea of the different types of batteries and which one you might want to be going with. So guys, let's go outside, take this first flight and see how this drone performs. Okay guys, we're outside, not a bad day, very bright. A little bit of wind today though, so we'll see how that's gonna influence our drone. Between 10 and 20 miles an hour, so you can see the trees back here. But anyways, we have all our equipment here. And the first thing I'm gonna do here is put these batteries in. And I'm using the least favorable batteries because I wanna acquire a GPS signal first. And just remember that if this is your first time powering this drone, it might take you a couple minutes just to acquire some satellites. Now, as you saw in beta flight, we need at least 8 satellites so we can arm this drone. So, all right. Start recording, so we're recording now. And I have no satellites as expected. It's showing proper altitude. We have 4 satellites now. Everything looks really good. 6 satellites. Once we get 7, we're gonna have a good home position. Can I change the min required satellites though? Min satellites right there, it says. Let's change that. Dang it. We have 6, so that's what we're gonna use. Save and reboot. All right. See if we can arm. Yeah, we can arm. All right. We're in angle mode here. A little windy. Let's go for the first flight. Rescue not available. Now down to 4 satellites. Boink. 4 minutes. Not bad. Not bad. So it's doing an amazing job. It did a good job going that far. I'm really impressed with the VTX. All right. Okay, we're back from the flight, and this overall was a really interesting experience. So let's just jump right into it because I have a lot to say. Okay, so we went out there, and the first thing I did was put the batteries in here. Now I know we'll be depending a lot on the GPS today, so I know that was a big issue of concern of me because the GPS is gonna make or break this drone. So the first thing I did was use my battery to acquire the GPS satellites. Now, if you're gonna power this up for the first time, it does take a while to acquire the satellites, especially if you've changed positions or locations. So to get the job done of acquiring the satellites, I did use the battery that I least like to use in the flight, which are these Panasonics. Anyways, I did load this up into the drone and then try to acquire the satellites. As I said, I had no intention of using these batteries to fly, but it did take a little bit over 1 minute to acquire any satellites. So after a little bit after a minute, I did acquire the first 3 satellites, and then more and more gradually as time passed, I acquired more satellites. Now, you know, I was expecting somewhere around 8 to 9 satellites total. In fact, the way this is set up in Betaflight from the factory is that you want to have around 8 satellites for fail-safe and return to home. In this case, I couldn't get anything above 5 satellites on the ground, so I couldn't arm the drone. The drone would not arm. Obviously, I have it in my settings that I can't arm the drone without having a certain amount of satellites. So I had to use the OSD menu, and sure enough, that worked out really well. Good thing for OSD. And you can see that I went through the menu and changed the required number of satellites so that I could arm the drones. Okay, so we took off and the drone took off like a regular drone, no big deal there. Power was adequate. I didn't feel any difference compared to any other drone. It was just weird trying to get used to the screen. Now, I have a lot of telemetry on the screen, more than my average drone, so it was just weird keeping my eyes on everything. Now, the second thing I noticed was just the camera, the quality of the camera. The camera was super clear, guys. Obviously, I'm close to myself, so there's no breakup. And I am using my DJI goggles with a module here for video, and it was crystal clear, guys, super clear. Now, I've used the Caddx Retel before. This is the Retel V2. And it works really well. One of my favorite analog cameras. I've used it before in Gep RC products, and the camera is simply amazing. I think it's one of the best analog cameras on the market. So I did fly that battery for 5 or so minutes, and then I came in for a landing, and I had, I think, a little bit over 3.3 to 3.1 volts. No big deal there. But you know, that wasn't gonna be an accurate representation because I came in early, and also I had the battery on this for almost 3 minutes just trying to acquire satellites before I actually armed the drone. So fair enough, I'm satisfied with my first flight, and I decided to put the next battery. Now this is the Sony VT6. This is probably one of the best batteries here for this kind of flying. Now this is kind of a compromise. There's also the Sony VTC5, and the Sony VTC5 has a higher output, I think around 20 amps of output, which is more than adequate for this kind of drone. But the capacity is lower. Now I went with this one because it does have a bigger capacity. This one is 3000 milliamp hour and also has a output of 15 amps. So this was going to be my long range battery, highest capacity, and this should give me the advertised 15 minutes that they're advertising on their websites. So I said, okay, here's my chance to actually stretch the legs out a little bit. So let's go for a little bit further, range test and see how well this thing performs. So telemetry looks good. We go out, go for a further flight down the road. Sure enough, we're going out there and we get to our typical distance that I usually fly my freestyle drones, and link quality looks great. Image, VTX, great. So I said, okay, let's turn around to me, make sure nothing is wrong. Okay, yes, looks good. And kept going, and I got to the point where it was like, okay, I can see a little bit more haze, a little more pixelation, some breakup. It wasn't bad breakup, guys, but I decided, okay, it's windy. This is my first time flying this drone. I do want to return this drone to me, so let's turn back around. And sure enough, everything worked out pretty well. I got really good range. Express LRS is amazing, guys. I'm using this regular linear antenna here, not even like a Moxon antenna or directional antenna, and the link quality was still close to like 99 to 100. Really good link quality there. And guys, the most important thing to me that was impressive was the VTX and the VTX power, and just the image quality coming back to my goggles. Like I said, there's a lot of factors in here, and this is going to vary based upon your antenna. This is the analog version. There's also a DJI version as well. But your receiver and your antenna choice is going to dictate how well your video is coming back to you. But it came back, and sure enough, I got back and I had time to spare. I was around maybe 3.5 volts. And I said, okay, I have a Lion battery in here. I can bring this down to around 3.0. But for my case, I'm going to land around 3.1 to 3.2 volts. And no big deal, guys. By the time I landed, it was way over 15 minutes. It was around 15.5 to 15.34, and I landed around 3.2 volts. So I had at least 0.2 more volts and hopefully maybe 2 more minutes. Now, I have to say now, these are brand spanking new Sony batteries. And this was actually the first flight on them. So, your mileage may vary depending on what batteries you use, the quality of the batteries, and how much milliamp hour or capacity is in your battery. That was cool. I was hyped, and yeah, I had my last set of batteries right here, and these are the LG HE4. Now the difference between this one and the Sony's is that this one even has a higher output as far as current is concerned. This one is a 20 amp output, but the capacity is a little bit lower. This is a 25 milliamp hour capacity. So I figured, since I have a really high output battery, and this one was made for that, I think it says it on here, this is a high drain battery, I was going to use that battery to try and figure out, or try to see the accurate capabilities of this drone, since I'll be doing some more punch outs, some more loops and so forth. So sure enough, put the battery in there, try to do some loops and stuff, and it worked out pretty okay. It's not a freestyle drone. It did rolls pretty well, some loops okay as well. You do some power loops, and you will get some shudder on the way out, or it wouldn't track as straight like a typical freestyle drone. Yeah, so I disarmed this drone, and by the time I landed, I had 3.3 volts, and it was around 10 minutes of flight time. So even with a smaller capacity battery and doing some higher throttle or punch outs, I still got 10 minutes pretty easily, and I'm sure I can get somewhere around 12 to maybe 14 minutes. I would think 14 minutes just by doing some casual flying with it. All right, guys, so before we wrap this up, some things to know here about this whole drone here. Like I said, the camera was amazing, very clear. I think one of the best cameras. But what I didn't mention was there's a little bit of vibration in here. I don't know if it's the props on this. I don't expect it to be as smooth as a freestyle drone. And also, we had a lot of wind today, as I said before, between 10 and 20 miles an hour. That may have been playing an input on this drone. It's a very light drone, less than 250 grams, especially without the action camera on here. But it was less noticeable as I went to altitude and went for my long range flying. It's only when I was low and trying to turn or do some climbs or ups and downs, then I would see the vibration in there. So that's one thing to note with this drone. It's not as smooth as some of the previous drones that I've flown. Okay, so the second thing to note about this drone is that I had a hard time acquiring satellites. Now, this can be very subjective. Depending on where you are, your environment, you know, I've used GPS a lot in my life, years and years, probably decades of experience using GPS. I use GPS for a living. I know there's a lot of variables and factors that can affect your coverage, but you know, I was able to get average around 5 satellites every time before I took off, and I couldn't get higher than that. Maybe once or twice I would get 6, but it's interesting to know that, you know, the recommended satellites that they need for this thing is 8, and I can't get this. As I said, now I'm saying that for me, this is my experience, because you might get 10, 15, who knows how many. The reason I'm bringing this up is because a lot of the, how can I say it, functions or logic in this drone is based upon the GPS, meaning if I don't have enough satellites, then, you know, I can't return to home, the failsafe may not work, my home arrow might be different, my home start point might be different, all the telemetry might be off because I don't have enough satellites or the required amount. And I say this because when I was flying, I would get, okay, so I reduced it to 6 required for return to home. And sometimes in fact I would get 6, but sometimes I would take a turn or just be flying and I would lose it and I would go down to 5 satellites, which is still adequate, honestly. But then my return to home, you will see, is not applicable or not available. It will say return to home, not available. And that's not reassuring. If I'm flying pretty far and I had, say, 6 or 7 or 8 when I took off, and now I'm down to 5, I still have adequate satellites for navigation, but the return to home is not going to work. So I don't know if it's this specific brand of module, but I do wish I would get more. So what I intend to do now, later on, I'm going to go into beta flight and reduce the number to 5. So even if I have 5 satellites, the return to home should still work. So I wouldn't recommend you lower it initially. I would recommend you fly the drone first and see what the behavior is, and then adjust accordingly, which is what I'm doing right now. All right, guys, I want to add one more thing as a bonus here. One more thing to note with this drone is these rubber bands and this battery strap right here. I didn't think I would have to use these, and I actually didn't use them. But you know, as you can see here, these things fit. It doesn't really matter because I'm only gonna put one. These batteries here fit pretty tight. They're in here pretty good. It's actually sometimes hard to remove. But I did have some crash today. I had a few crashes, maybe 3 crashes. And every time I crashed this drone, the batteries would just eject, would just pop out. Although you may not think that you need them, I would highly recommend you use at least maybe the rubber band to keep those things in place, or maybe the battery strap. I did get these from HGLRC, it was included. I don't know if you're gonna get these as well. But I am now gonna start flying this drone with a battery strap or a rubber band, because the first time I lost this drone, it crashed. I didn't know where it was, and I lost my telemetry. I couldn't put the beeper on, so I couldn't even find it. I think from now on, yeah, battery strap and rubber bands is gonna be. The Rekon35 is a pretty awesome drone, guys, but who is this thing for? All right, so I said this drone is for someone who is looking for something different or unique or just interesting. I would say this is a very unique drone. Everything from the lightweight nature of it, you can see how skinny it is, bare bones, you know, no kind of cover or protection, very skinny arms, and that's because you want to get long range. So it's a very unique drone. Then you also have GPS in here, which is not very common, and then you also have the power source. You have 2 batteries, an 18650 battery. So it's a different breed altogether. So if you're looking for something different, looking for something that's interesting and unique, I think this is the drone for you guys. The second person who this drone is for, someone who wants to get a little more peace or relaxation flying. Maybe you're tired of all the fast pace of just a freestyle or indoor flying, racing. You want to have something that's just very nice and smooth, just cruising. Now that requires more planning due to just the nature of this, you know, the power source, the current draw, and just the motors and design of this. It requires a lot more planning, so if you see a tree or obstacle, you have to plan accordingly. Also, you know, if you fly pretty far, now as I said before, if you have headwinds and you know you have a certain battery life on this, you may not be able to come back home based upon, you know, your capabilities of your battery. So it does require some planning. So it's a different aspect of FPV, and I like it. It requires a lot more, I guess, as I said, planning. All right. All right, guys. So what do you think about the Rekon35? I know this was a very long video. I had a blast flying this thing. You know, it's a pretty cool drone. It's a different segment for sure when you're using these kind of drones, guys. But anyways, let me know what you think about the Rekon35. You know, did it meet your expectations? Do you think you can be into this? Maybe not, I don't know. I do think it might need a specific gear like a long range, radio link, or maybe some better, goggles to get this thing to work pretty well. Maybe you don't have that gear, but let me know what you think about this. I thought it was pretty cool, guys. If you have any questions about this whole setup here, leave them down below. I will be happy to answer those questions. And while you're there, please consider subscribing to this channel. Therefore, you'll be notified whenever I do publish a new FPV video, just like this one and some others I have in the pipeline. So anyways, thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video. Peace.